guys, I said we were going to do this again. I said I would revisit it. We're going to look at more knife trends that I'm completely over, things that I'm just done with. So it's going to be a kind of a longer video. Let's turn this around and take a look at it from above. All right, guys, I said a long time ago that we were going to revisit this, just like I said in the intro, and we are. And we're going to start with the first thing that really drives me nuts and things that knife companies do that I wish they would stop doing. And the first one has to be making a knife with an ambidextrous lock mechanism, but not allowing for ambidextrous carry. It's one of the biggest things that people complain about in the knife industry. Button locks, ambidextrous. You can see here, Kaiser has provided you with an ambidextrous pocket clip. Spyderco. Spyderco for years has allowed you multiple ways to carry. Tip up, tip down, left, right, doesn't matter. You can carry this, and with this being a compression lock, it is 100% an ambidextrous lock. I'm not really good left-handed, but you can open and close this knife left-handed as easily as you can right-handed. This knife has the Snex Super Lock on it. This is that Tactile Knives Chupacabra. And it's a knife that I'm on the fence with. I don't like the Super Lock, but I do admit a lot of people do. And it's got an ambidextrous lock, but yet I don't have a way to carry it. I do know that on something like this, where you're using aluminum and things like that, there is an issue with the cost of the additional milling and the time it's going to spend on the mill. But I'm just here to tell you, like, it really wouldn't be that much to zip out a little area where you could just put this pocket clip, or, you know, similarly, pocket clip on here. This pocket clip, not ambidextrous. That's the problem. It's just how it's built. Cold Steel offered this option with multiple pocket clips on knives. You could buy knives with pocket clips that it came with too, even when they were at a weird angle. They just sent you a second pocket clip. So there's no real reason knife companies can't do it. It really does drive me nuts, even though I'm not left-handed. I have a lot of friends that are, and it's one of the big first tier items that I see on knives when it's just so silly when you miss that boat. So there's your first one. Let's move on to the next thing that's driving me nuts in the knife industry. And this next one, it drives me crazy. It's knives that ship with loose pivots. There's companies that know that their knives aren't smooth. Benchmade being the predominant one. This one, ton of blade play in this because the pivot has to be loose. Spyderco is really famous for shipping knives that if you tighten the pivot down to where you lose your blade play, you have to then, like this one doesn't have blade play anymore, but now it is a two-hand opener. There is no way, without wrist flicking the shit out of this, that you can get this to snap open. As much as I like the petrified fish, this knife shipped with a good bit of blade play. The problem that I have with some of these knives is sometimes, and I'm going to show you one right here. You're going to see this in another video, in another clip too. No matter how tight I tighten this pivot, this knife has blade play. It's the way that they've shouldered their washers and things in this. No matter how much I tighten this, I still have blade play. And I've got it right now about as tight as you can get it and still be able to manipulate the knife. Companies do this, I think, intentionally, especially companies like Benchmade that know that their pivots wind up getting so tight by the time you lose the ample amount of blade play that they're not smooth anymore. Or it's just a QA issue, but I'm tired of it. I'm tired of getting knives that come in that have loose pivots from the factory. I shouldn't have to take this knife apart and clean it up to, well, I don't mean take it apart, but I shouldn't have to take the screw out, Loctite it, and then tighten it down on any of these knives to the point where I want it so that I don't have blade play in that knife, because then that does affect your lockup. It can cause lock slip and things like that. If you're going to ship a knife, it should have been QA'd. It should have been checked to make sure that the pivot was tight enough. And if you can't do that, then just stop trying to make flipper knives. Now, this knife, I will tighten this down. And it does tighten down and not lose its action. But right now, I have to retighten this pivot because it gains some looseness. So that should be unacceptable from any company, any factory, but it happens way more often than I would like to admit. So let's move on to the next thing that I'm completely over when it comes to knives. And it's cheap and undersized hardware. The hardware that you use on a knife, a T6 should not be used anywhere on a knife except for the pocket clip. T6 hardware is garbage. This knife, tiny little T6, if they're even T6 on this. Yeah, actually they are T6. I know they're T6 because I just recently had this knife apart. Tiny, tiny hardware on this. They strip out easy. Case in point, a couple of these screws are stripped. The only reason that these screws are still in there is I filled the hole as much as I could with super glue and then got the screw in as best I could after I cleaned the threads up, because these screws are so soft that the threads stripped. This is not a good knife at all. And then, you know, it's just something that really does drive me nuts. If you look at this knife, the structural elements of the body of your knife should not be using these small screws that strip out so incredibly easy. This one, T8 and T15 on this. The only spot where there's a T6 is on the pocket clip. This new one that I just got, this are T8, and I think it's all T8 except for this. The only thing they've used T6 on is this, where you're not absorbing and holding the knife together with it, because people are going to take their knives apart for maintenance. It is a silly, silly thing that they're doing. And not just, these are fairly high quality screws. Makusta has always done a lot, really do good work, but the fact is these screws, if you strip this, you're never getting it out. These are just cheap, soft screws on this Rat 1. So the hardware you use is as important as all the other things you do, because you want to tighten these down so your knife doesn't rattle and come apart. And if you strip this out, then you got to try and get a new screw from the factory. You got to try and drill out that head and then get it out. It's just silly at this point when there's such good quality, larger, like T8 head hardware that's available out there, that companies are still using T6 for the body screws. Like I said, no problem with T6 on a pocket clip, because it's really not got to be that tight. It's not like it's holding the knife together. These things are. So there you go. Small, cheap hardware in the knives. And this one really drives me nuts. It's not so much to do with the structure knife. This is the Ironfly YOLO. This is the Kestrel by QSP Knives. This is this random string of numbers and letters. And I don't know which one's the actual model number. I don't know. This causes problems because when you try to look things up or find something, if it just had a name, it would be so much easier. But there's no name for these. These naming structures can get weird. You've got so many knives that it's just a series of numbers. And you can't actually find a name for the knife if you just give it a name, even if it's something silly. This is the YOLO. I mean, really, the YOLO, the Django. I know I just accidentally pronounced the D, but the Django by Kunwu. Knives with names are so much easier to find. Even this one, when you say 80-20, you know that that's a name. Come up with something that is not so difficult to find. So when you're looking for a knife, like that is D2 pocket knife green. That's not a name. It's ridiculous. And it makes it very difficult as a reviewer or as a consumer. If you find a knife you like and you're looking for it, it makes it really difficult to find it. This is a nice knife. I think people would enjoy this knife. I think that it would be a great knife for a lot of people. But if you can't find it because it doesn't actually have a name, well, then that's just ridiculous. So that one's not so much as one of the big ones, but we're going to move on to one that is a big one. And it's sheaths for fixed blades. For sake, companies, especially Cold Steel, stop putting garbage sheaths on knives that people are paying upwards of $300 for. This is the Cold Steel Tipan. I had to get a sheath made for it because not so much that I care about scratches on the blade, because if you look, there's scratches all over this blade. It's not that I give a crap about that. It's the fact that this material ruins the edge every time you're in and out of the sheath. Other companies do it all the time. They give you a really nice knife and then just a flimsy garbage sheath that has no way to carry it and things like that. This actually is a pretty versatile sheath. If it was made in a different material, it'd be great. But there's companies out there that put out cheap leather sheaths that are unsafe for carry if you're carrying a knife for hard use, and just generally aren't good material or long lasting. A fixed blade knife is going to last you for the rest of your life. It's not going to wear out. It's not a folding knife that has moving parts and things like that. You have to have a good carry option to be able to carry that knife for the years that you're going to have. The cheap leather sheaths that a lot of companies send knives with that are flimsy and thin, that if you fall down, there's a chance that that knife is going to pierce through the sheath and cut you or injure you. A Kydex sheath is a good option as well if that's what you want, but not the Securex, the fiberglass. If you have to then go outside of what you've already spent on a knife, like this knife is a $200 or sometimes $300+ knife, that now you have to go then and drop almost another $100 to have a custom sheath made for, it's unacceptable. I should be able to take this item and use it properly and not have to worry about the sheath damaging my knife or the fact that the sheath is not allowing me to carry it safely. So there you go. That's that one. This is a big one for me. It really drives me nuts. I'm going to put a link to Spirit of the Bear down below, and the guy that did this one for me, Harry Savage. I'll try to remember to put links down below if you do need a sheath made, because they both did amazing work. So let's move on to what I think is probably going to be the last one, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm in a rambunctious mood. And this last one really, really does drive me nuts. And it's 100% these elements of a knife that limit the blade to handle ratio. This knife has got a wonk. Don't get me wrong, this is probably the best EDC knife on the market for the broad majority of people. But there's elements to this knife on both of these that limit the blade to handle ratio. Well, there's an element, and it's huge lanyard tube, right? You wind up giving up space for blade because you could have dropped this down further and allowed you to have more blade in this if you didn't have this huge lanyard hole. This knife has an accurately sized lanyard hole. It's in the back spacer, and you've got a great blade to handle ratio on it. This one's not as bad, but you still do have a wonky blade to handle ratio. Now, a blade to handle ratio sometimes doesn't matter on this knife because of the style of blade. It actually gives you really good control to have a bit more handle and some smaller blade, but this is more of an outdoors, almost skinning style blade. These knives have got a wonky blade to handle ratio simply because Spyderco refuses to stop using this lanyard tube that, one, makes it difficult to take the knife apart, and two, limits how much blade you can have. There's a lot of things that companies do that are silly, and this is one of them. I don't like the way it looks, first of all, and I plugged this one with the thing that has the tritium in it. But it's ridiculous when other companies are able to provide options that don't limit things. This is on the external, on the backspacer. Sorry, guys, I bet you heard the ice machine. It's got an external lanyard hole. There's companies that put your lanyard hole here in. And there's other things that people do. They make these weird backspacers or things like that that limit your blade to handle ratio. So it's just silly to me that companies keep doing these things, even though it's become glaringly obvious that it's a waste of time. So that's the ones that I've got right now. Like I said, this was a revisiting. So let's turn us around. We'll do some final thoughts, and I'll send you out about your day. Yeah, guys. So those are just my things. Like, I hate when companies do this. It just detracts from their knives, and especially things like sending out knives with loose pivots and loose hardware or crappy hardware. It just drives me nuts, especially considering what we're paying for knives these days from some of these companies. So with that being said, guys, that's it on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. You didn't, give it a thumbs down, but tell me why I can't change the content. Share it, like it, subscribe, do all those things. If you want to support the channel outside of my membership that has grown a little bit recently, there's a ton of affiliate links down below that you can use to purchase knives, things like that. There's an Amazon store. Take that, pin it to your browser, and use it for all of your Amazon shopping. It doesn't cost you anything at checkout, but it definitely supports the channel. I have a couple of links down there that actually have a discount built in. 10% off at KATSU Knives. I'm sorry, 10% off at Tempered Trail and Coffee Brand Coffee if you just use that link down below. Great, great coffee. I just ordered some for Christmas presents. And the Tempered Trail stuff is great to help support my buddy Nathan's business. There is a coupon code crazysharp, all one word, that you can use at KATSU Knives, Ferrum Forge Knife Works, and Rosecraft Blades. Like I said, I have a membership if you want to check that one out. I have a public Discord down below where it says join the community. Guys, that's it on this one. I love you all. Keep it clean in the comment section. If it's your birthday, happy birthday. And I will see you in the next video.